Hey guys! So this video, this is actually a precursor to the 8.5 video. We're going to talk about how to find common denominators, which yes, that is a topic that you used to do back in like 5th grade, but it's back and we're going to start off with exactly that. These are 5th grade problems at the beginning. Now, they don't explain anything to you when you're in 5th grade as far as like why you're doing things. So maybe you're looking at this question and you can already tell what the least common denominator is. Oh, this is Logan, my helper today.
Yeah.
So your denominators are 4 and 5, and what you're doing is you're finding what's called a least common multiple for 4 and 5. And most 4th, 5th grade teachers, when they teach this, have you list out the multiples. So like 4, 8, and 12, and then for 5, you start listing out, 5, I guess I should keep going, 12, 16, 20, 24, yada yada. I missed a 10. 5, 10, 15, 20, yada yada yada. And then the first number that you had in common, that is called your least common multiple for those denominators, and therefore that is your common denominator. Now, let me show you what you're really doing when you have a common denominator. So you look at the numbers and you write them in their factored form. So when I look at like a 4 is really a 1 times 2 times 2. And then a 5 is really a 1 times 5. So when I'm trying to shoot for my common multiples of these, what I do is I look for anything that they have in common first. For instance, they both have a 1, right? And I write the 1 in my denominator. And then I don't see any other pairings, right? So I still have a 2 and a 2 and a 5. And those all get written. Oops. And if you were to multiply 1 times 2 times 2 times 5 together, you would get a denominator of 20. Okay, so this is the same idea for common denominators. The reason I wanted to show you this way, which really doesn't make a lot of sense to you right now, because you're like, why would I do that? Is because what we're doing is we're taking a number and we're breaking up into its factors. It's a common word for us, right? Factors. So I want to use that approach on the next question, even though I know you're looking at that question and going, I already know the answer. All right, so let's talk about a 6. If I write out the prime factorization for 6, that is 1 times 2 times 3. You knew that. And then the prime factorization for 4 is 1 times 2 times 2. So when I look at what they have in common first, so they have a common 1, and they have a common 2. So on my building up common denominator, I have a 1 and a 2, and I still have a 3, and I still have
4.
Another 2, which then if I do multiply those all together, I get 2 times 3 times 2, that's a 12, yeah. So the least common denominator there is a 12. And I know you guys are looking at that going, yeah, I already knew that. I don't know why you wrote that out so weird. Well, the reason I wrote that out so weird is because we're not in 5th grade anymore. We have Algebra 2 questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our denominators, and we're going to look at what we're going to call the factored form of the denominators. That should be an old topic for you. And you know what? Those denominators, they are in what's called factored form. There's really no way for us to kind of break that apart. So when I think about what my common denominator is going to be, I notice I need a 2x squared. That is one of the factors I'm going to need. And then the other factor I'm going to need is this x plus 1. And that's it, guys. That's all I need you to do today, is identify what would be your least common denominator.
What?
That's it, right? You just write down what you see. It's going to get a little more complicated in a minute. So when I look at number 4, here's our first denominator. We got a 5n plus 1. That's like one number. And then we've got a denominator over here of a 5, which is a totally different number. So when I start making a list of what I need in my common denominator, well, I need a 5n plus 1. Well, what else do I need, Logan? What else did I need? Did you catch that? I got the 5n plus 1. What else do I need?
All right.
5, another 5. And you don't have to do any more work for me today other than figure out what your least common denominator would be. So far, not too bad, right? Sometimes in algebra, things are simplified because numbers are crazy, but algebra is kind of boring because they don't change too much. Now, this is where it gets kind of weird. This denominator is not in a factored format. there's a common factor of 4x that you could factor out of this. So it's kind of like our number problems where I wrote them as multiplication problems. This is the same idea. So dividing a 4x out of here and here, you're still going to have an x and then a plus 1. So that's really that first denominator. Now the second denominator is still a 2x. All right, it's about to get real weird, guys, so hang tight.
Okay.
Okay is right. Let's talk about... That's weird. I got a 4x and I got a 2x, which I know you're thinking, oh, do I write down 4x times 2x? Well, no, because 4x times 2x would be 8x squared. That's like way too big. That wouldn't be what's called our least common denominator. 2x is actually inside of 4x. Isn't this like 2 times 2x? So they have a common 2x. We don't have to write it twice.
Almost like 2 plus 2, 4.
It is kind of like 2 plus 2. It's 2 times 2 this time. All right, we also, careful, can't lose this. We still have a 2 in front of here. And then, of course, don't lose the important one here, the x plus 1. X plus 1. All right. If you wrote this down, would I count you wrong? Absolutely not. It's just a little weird. When I say 2 times 2, we would usually write that as 4x times x plus 1.
So I know there's something dealing with that.
You are correct. There is something dealing with that. All right, so this is what's called your least common denominator. A lot of kids get in trouble on this section because they just throw me a common denominator and they're like, whatever, I'll deal with it later, because what we're going to do later on in the week is that we're going to add these together and subtract these. But you want the least amount of work possible, so we should be shooting for the least common denominator. Oh boy, number 6 looks really complicated, right? But it's not. So this denominator is b minus 2. That's its own thing. This denominator is b plus 5. Yep. They are two totally different numbers. I know they look similar, but they are two totally different numbers. So when I go through and I'm like, well, what do I need in my common denominator? Well, I need a b minus 2.
B minus 5.
And a b plus 5, yes.
B plus 5.
He's only 7. He doesn't remember those signs yet. Very good. Okay. Oh boy. It's going to get exciting here, guys.
From 7 to heaven.
7 to heaven. All right. P squared minus 4. That is not in factored form, is it? This is really p plus 2 times p minus 2. We call that the difference of two squares, Logan. All right. This denominator is in its factored form. It's p minus 2. All right. Here we go. For our common denominator, and this is the one that tricks kids the most. Look at your two fractions here. It is kind of hard. Notice that they have a common p minus 2. So what that means is we write down p minus 2, but only one time. We don't write it twice. And then we also have
p minus 2. P plus 2.
A p plus 2 that is needed. Very good. So this was a case where once we had everything in factored form, one of the denominators was actually a factor inside of the other denominator. So to come up with the least common denominator, we had to see the pieces.
I'm still looking at that p minus 4.
Well, it's different. This is what's tricky for some kids too, so thanks for bringing that up, Logan. So this p squared minus 4, it changes, and it changes into this. This is the new name for p squared minus 4. Ooh, one more problem. And it's the best one. It's a couple of trinomials. Okay, so same idea. This is a factoring pattern. This factors as what we call a reverse trinomial or reverse foiling problem. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 15 but add up to 8. I bet Sissy could help me with that one. Any idea what two numbers are that multiply to give us 15 but they also add up to give us 8? Pressure. 15 is 5 times 3. Does that add up to 8 as well? You solved the puzzle. There you go. So v plus 5 and v plus 3. Now this problem's way trickier. My kids would tell you that this one's the trickier problem out of the two because this 2 in front really messes up everything. So this one might take you guys a little bit of guessing and checking, but I know the first terms have to multiply to 2v squared, so that's a 2v and a 1v. Sissy can help me with this part. Two numbers that multiply to give us 25. 5 times 5. And the only other option is 25 times 1, and Algebra 2 kids will tell you don't go there. All right, so I'm thinking if we put, it doesn't matter where we put it because 5 and 5 you can't flip around. And look at these arches. This adds up to 10 plus 5, which is totally 15. All right, cool. So that was the hard part for some of us, is the factoring. Now let's go through and come up with our list for our common denominator. But wait, do they have anything in common, Logan? Do you see the same thing that shows up in blue and in green?
The top and the bottom. There.
Well, yes, that's true. These are both blue because these are equivalent. But is there a v plus 5 on both of the fractions here?
Let's see. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a common v plus 5 that we just write down. And then that's all they have in common, so now I just start listing everything else out. I got a v plus 3. And then I also need this guy, 2v plus 5. And I wrote too big. Wah, wah. Alright, so that was a good time. Here's what you're going to do for my Algebra 2 kids, because this is actually one of the hardest parts of this week's lesson, is just finding the common denominator. And yes, I'm sure you noticed this unit has a lot of factoring in it, so that's another problem. You're going to take a quizzes for me on just this, finding common denominators, and that's it. Do the best you can, and if you feel like, man, I'm still struggling with that, let me know, and I'll send you some more practice, and we can talk through where we're having struggles, okay? And if the issue is, man, my factoring is a little rusty, that's an easy fix, guys. I got lots of things we can do to practice on factoring, okay? Good luck. Say bye, Logue.
Bye.
Say bye, sis.
Bye.